Hi, it's Chris Armantrout from San Jose BMW. I'm here with this bearing that was sent to us by Mr. Armantrout, claiming that this bearing was bad, and I want to go through a few obvious tests just to point out the bearing is in fact in very good condition. So to start off with, just to point out, here's a brand new BMW bearing. I had removed the rubber seal here, you see, and then after removing the seal on both sides, I cleaned all the grease that's put in here by BMW so that we could properly inspect the bearing. So when we spin the bearing, you can see it spins smoothly, very quiet. It sounds quite good. Now we're going to look for some play in the bearing as if it's been worn. So we're going to put it here in the vise and clamp it down firmly on the outer ring of the bearing, and we have a dial indicator here on the inner race of the bearing, and we're going to see how much movement there is. And as I move the inner race back and forth, you can see on the needle here that there's about 10 thousandths movement of the inner race to the outer race on the dial gauge. Now, removing this bearing, we'll put in a brand new, out of the package stock factory BMW bearing. This one has the oil seal and the grease in place, so it's a lot harder to get the movement. But if I firmly move it back and forth, I'll zero the gauge here. You can see that there also is 10 thousandths play in a brand new bearing. So there's no play in this bearing. Now, one final thing I'd like to do, this is a bearing out of a different bike, but it is a rear drive bearing from a BMW. Again, I'm going to spin it. You can see it spins smoothly and quietly, as one would expect. And here's a bad bearing so that we have some comparison of the sound. So here's the bad bearing, and you can see that it's very obvious that the bearing is bad. It has interplay, but obviously the balls are rough and it shows up. We go back to this bearing, you can hear it nice and quiet, and then we go back to Chris's bearing and we'll see that it spins also smooth and quiet. So this bearing is a perfectly good serviceable bearing. We did damage the seals in removing the bearing, but since we assumed it was bad, that is just the way it is. By the way, if you look at the grease that's on the inner part of the seal, you can see that the grease is still clean and still present on both sides of the bearing. So with new seals, this bearing would be serviceable for probably double the time it's been in use, perhaps up to 60 or 80,000 miles. There you go.